Aloha, I'm Colin Moore, and in this UHERO Focus video, I'd like to discuss a new report on public campaign financing. Now, we all know Hawaii has been plagued by corruption scandals in recent years, and in response, a Blue Ribbon Commission led by Judge Dan Foley recently released a report with some carefully considered suggestions. Among them was a proposal to provide more public funds for political campaigns. This means candidates would receive money to run their campaign directly from the state, rather than raising that money through private donations. Hawaii has actually had a system of partial public financing in place for more than 40 years, but few candidates participate because it no longer provides sufficient resources. This figure shows the amounts dispersed in constant dollars and the number of candidates receiving public funds since 1980. As you can see, in the early years of the program, it provided core funding for many candidates for governor, lieutenant governor, and mayor. For example, in 1994, it dispersed $1.7 million in inflation-adjusted dollars. But in recent years, fewer and fewer candidates have relied on the program to finance their campaigns. In 2022, in fact, only $71,000 in public funds were given to just 15 campaigns. So why does Hawaii's long-standing program have such low rates of participation? Well, the answer is simple: because the level of public funding is simply far too low, particularly for the legislative races where it could really make a difference. Under the current rules for House and Senate candidates, the amount of public funding is set at 15% of the total expenditure limit. So, for example, in House District 1, the state would match donations of $100 or less up to about $4,000. But this, of course, is far too low to run a competitive campaign. Basically, Hawaii's current program is rarely used, it's poorly funded, and it's largely ineffective. And this isn't too surprising. Most research shows that partial public funding programs like Hawaii's just don't work. So would a more robust form of public financing benefit Hawaii? What are our options? There are 32 active public campaign financing programs in the United States. Each is slightly different, but there are three standard models we could consider for Hawaii. The first one is relatively simple. This program provides a block grant to cover all campaign costs. In this system, candidates are required to raise a certain number of small qualifying donations, but once they reach this threshold, they're given a public grant to cover the remaining campaign costs. These programs have been successfully implemented in Arizona, Maine, and Connecticut. In Arizona, for example, legislative candidates must collect 200 donations of $5 to qualify. The second type of programs are supermatch programs, and these multiply the value of small dollar donations. In New York City, for example, contributions are matched on an 8-to-1 basis up to $175. This means that a $100 donation is actually worth $900 to a campaign. So you can see how these small dollar donations can really become much more valuable. Finally, there are voucher programs that allow residents to distribute public funds to the candidates of their choice. In Seattle, which is so far the only jurisdiction to use this system, each registered voter receives 4 vouchers worth $25 for a total of $100, and they can send those vouchers to the candidates of their choice. So how are these programs working? Candidates can't be forced to participate in public financing systems, so one test of success is how many actually opt into the system. As this figure shows, the block grant programs in place in Arizona, Maine, and Connecticut have relatively high rates of participation, and Connecticut stands out with a participation rate above 80%. This is probably because it provides the most generous levels of funding, and that means it doesn't make sense for most candidates to raise their own money. So one lesson here is that an effective program has to provide candidates with enough resources so it makes sense to participate in the program. Because states and municipalities have been experimenting with these programs for several decades, we actually know a lot about how effective they are. The results are mixed, but they're generally positive. First, most scholarship shows that generous public financing programs increase electoral competition by giving challengers the resources they need to take on incumbents. Second, these programs tend to contribute to greater diversity among candidates and among donors. In New York City, for example, small donors and public money accounted for 64% of all funds provided to city council candidates. These donors were far more representative, and they came from neighborhoods that matched the income, poverty level, racial composition, and level of education in the city at large. They also seemed to encourage more contact between office seekers and voters. Studies of candidates in Maine found that they spent more time canvassing voters and discussing policy issues when they no longer had to raise private donations. Unfortunately, there's less evidence that public financing contributes to greater trust in government, reduces corruption, or leads to major changes in public policy, and this is discussed in more detail in the report itself. Some research also suggests that block grant programs could increase political polarization, but other scholars have found no real difference between the ideology of candidates using public funds and those who raise their money through private donations, so we're a little unsure about that result. Public support of such programs is generally high, but naturally some people are opposed to using general revenue to pay for political activities. On balance, we think that a robust system of public funding could be good for Hawaii. But if policymakers are serious about creating a program that would provide challengers with funding to run competitive campaigns, any of the three options would be a major improvement over the status quo. First, we could transform Hawaii's system into a supermatch program. Following New York City, Hawaii could adopt an $8 match for contributions up to $100, while also increasing the maximum amount of public funds available to a far greater percentage of the total expenditure limit for each office. Alternative, we could create a block grant program similar to what's in place in Connecticut. In fact, Senator Carl Rhodes has introduced a bill this session to provide qualifying candidates with grants that approximate the spending of a typical incumbent. Finally, we could distribute campaign vouchers and create a program similar to the one currently in place in Seattle by providing 4 vouchers worth $25 each to every registered voter in the state. Although this system has actually demonstrated the most impressive results in increasing electoral competition, it's also unfortunately the most difficult to administer. In the end, any one of these policy options would likely create more political competition by leveling the playing field and could be supported by a relatively modest appropriation from general funds. Thanks for watching this UHERO video, and please feel free to read the report if you'd like more details. Aloha.